stay at home and protect lives. That's the clear warning from the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, who says it's not a request, but an instruction.
Debido a la emergencia del coronavirus, alumnos y docentes han tenido
Hi folks, quick update from me on the campaign against coronavirus.
I want every American to be prepared for the hard days that lie ahead.
Rallentare la diffusione del nuovo coronavirus. In
Finding faster ways to test people who may have the virus.
After almost 3 months, all non-essential shops in England, including clothing retailers and department stores, can reopen today if they stick to strict safety measures.
Hello and welcome to Corona Chronicles, where in the coming weeks we will attempt to touch base with a wide range of people from all walks of life to talk about how the current situation is impacting them both professionally and personally, as well as offering a cupful of cheer, some top tips and stats, and most importantly to touch virtual base with a cheery hello and without the need for hand sanitiser. I'm Nick Randall.
Tomorrow I'm presenting at the M&M meeting, and the mortality in intensive care now is immense. We look at data for the last 6 weeks. We had 160 patients, 80 died, and the rest is going to the wards. That's consistent with national data. Being in intensive care and being intubated and on the ventilator, it carries a very, very bad prognosis. We're still learning this disease process.
A number of post-lockdown dramas have been produced since COVID-19 reared its ugly head, one of which we featured in a recent edition, and all reflecting how coronavirus has impacted our day-to-day lives. However, as truth is so often more powerful than fiction, an ingenious new project combining the two is now in production, dramatising real stories of real frontline NHS staff. The result, Unmasked, gets its first release in podcast form in early July. And Serena Haywood, Senior Consultant Paediatrician at St George's Hospital in Tooting, who is the show's creator and producer, as well as Torchwood Doctor Who scriptwriter, and also a previous guest from our SNS parent strand, Joe Lidster, both join me now. Firstly, welcome to the show. Let's start with you, Serena. This is such a brilliant concept. I mean, offering us authentic voices from the front line, and not only doctors and nurses, but patients, porters, cleaners, security staff, and more. How early in the crisis did it hit upon you, this idea?
Hi, it was around about just as we were at the peak, just after the Easter weekend, and it was working as a medical examiner, which is what I'm doing in addition to being a paediatrician, which is essentially supporting junior doctors to write death certificates and talking to the bereaved, which clearly was just such a huge part of what everybody's been following on the news. And St George's Hospital was one of the busiest hospitals, and it was designated as one of the intensive care units. So as a writer, I've always got half an ear open for dialogue.
Sure.
And one of our intensive care doctors came in after a night shift, tired. He's a very straightforward guy. He's a fantastic clinician. Doesn't mince his words. And was very clear about how tough it was, how everybody was learning on the job. But yet there were words that I hadn't heard before in terms of the way that things were being done, and just the human impact of what was happening right there, right now. And it felt like a monologue. And I thought, well, we've seen doctors from Italy being interviewed. We were seeing newspaper articles, but we weren't really hearing the really deep-seated emotional impact that was having on the staff,
sure,
the patients. And as I was walking out the door thinking about this, I walked past one of our cleaners, and he was cleaning the door handle of an office that gets used a lot. And he was saying under his breath, this is very important. And I realised that without the cleaners, you don't have the intensive care units. And then I realised that being in a big hospital, it's like a beehive. Everything connects together. Everybody connects together. And I just wanted to hear all the stories right there, right now. And I thought, what better way than to do it other than to write it, to hear what people are saying, but to give it that extra bit of magic, which is what directors and actors bring to it.
So you interviewed all these people. I mean, how confident were you that they all were happy to share their sometimes harrowing stories? I mean, did some people take some time to be persuaded?
Do you know what? Not at all. Partly, I know a few of them because I work with them. Some are just to say hello to. A lot are connected with Nigel, who's the lead medical examiner. And people really, really wanted to tell their stories. Two things that struck me is one is that partly because I'm a doctor's supporter with the British Medical Association, so I'm very used to talking to people who have been through awful, terrible situations. So I hope that I'm a safe pair of ears, I guess, for people to listen, and how therapeutic it is to listen, how therapeutic it is for people to talk. But the other thing is just how open and honest people were, and how they wanted to say what they needed to say. And it was the original question that I had when I started was, so what did you do last night? Because it was mostly people coming off night shifts, and then it sort of adapted. But since we've set up the social media for the project, the interviewees are starting to follow us, and then of course you can see their social media pages. And what's so interesting is, I would say, right, this nurse educator, palliative care nurse, her story, so writing her story is her dedication to the procedure of supporting the families in the most compassionate and equal way possible, but her deep-seated desire to escape to the sea in the north of Ireland, where she's from. And sure enough, on her Facebook page there's a picture of her at the seaside in Ireland, and our mortuary assistant talked about sitting in the garden with a glass of wine, reflecting on his day with his dog called Maxie Priest, and sure enough, Maxie Priest is on his Facebook page. So we've really got to know these people, but just how honest they were, just in their interviews, about who they truly are.
We love him. He loves other dogs. He tolerates us totally. So tonight I kiss my boy, play with him a little bit, give him his dinner, give him his chicken foot, then give him cuddles and then sardine, and clean his teeth with a vibrating toothbrush. Then I research. Tomorrow I'm presenting at the M&M meeting, and the mortality in intensive care now is immense. We look at data for the last 6 weeks. We had 160 patients, 80 died, and the rest is going to the wards. That's consistent with national data. Being in intensive care and being intubated and on the ventilator, it carries a very, very bad prognosis. We're still learning this disease process. I'm an intensive care consultant since 2002 at St. George's, so I'm very senior. I'm also a cardiac anesthetist, and my work's been converted to totally intensive care, which I like. I like coming to work. I like coming to work before COVID, and I still think that there is a sense of purpose for us, and coming to work is better than sitting at home. That's why I feel sorry for people who are alone, or even with their families, they are stuck. I think it's a great privilege.
Were there any stories that, even from your seasoned background in the NHS, that shocked you or upset you? And was there anything you had to sort of scale down a bit?
In terms of shocking, there were several interviews where I was finding it hard to not shed a tear.
Sure.
That we had a box of tissues and used them. And again, writing them, then you go through it again. And so the process was interviewing, then transcribing, then writing, and each time hearing the same story just hit so hard. The thing that struck me particularly was how the patients were on their own. And we talked to an intensive care doctor who picks up the patients from district general hospitals and brings them to the intensive care unit. And he talked about how they'd be chatting, they'd be talking to the families on the phone saying, I'm off to intensive care unit now, they're going to help me with my breathing. And then that would be the last thing that they would say, because they would be battling with dropping oxygen levels in their blood, needing support. And then unfortunately, because right at the beginning, people were exceptionally ill, that was the last that they said. And the bewilderment of the staff talking to the families not being able to see their loved ones after they passed away in the funeral homes, was just it was just, everyone was just stunned. And the other thing that struck and just made me catch my breath was the intensive care units are used to people who are quite elderly, quite unwell. And there was a lot of people from the Black ethnic minority communities who were very young. And this is what's coming out in the news a lot. Sure. Young Black men particularly. And for around about 40% or even higher of the staff at St George's are from the hugely diverse background. And this is their communities being directly affected, yes, and also their colleagues being directly affected. And I was very keen to interview our cleaners, and Maureen, who is just so positive despite everything that's happened, knew personally two of her colleagues that had died. And again, we just had this moment of just thinking about how fast it had all happened and how shocking that was, but yet how optimistic and positive Maureen was and how positive people were. It's such a huge impact, and it's going to be impact for a long, long time.
So, Joe, let's bring you in on this now. When did you get the call to be one half of this writing team?
I don't know. I've got no concept of time.
Well,
I think like a lot of us. She called me a month or so ago and asked if it'd be something I'd be interested in doing. And I'm actually one of the lucky stroke unlucky people, and I'm actually very busy with work at the moment. But as a writer, I'm always on the lookout for things that will interest me or to get involved with, and sort of actually dispassionately taking out that this is all real. It's an interesting project in itself, but also what I found was I feel that this lockdown has been obviously psychologically hard, very hard for all of us. We all have our own stories about how we've dealt with it, and individual stories of people's mental health and so on. But actually, the way I think the majority of us have got through it is by kind of blocking out why we're actually doing it. So we've been thinking about how we cope with the lockdown, and not actually, we see the death figures every day and it's horrible, but we don't quite put that into actual deaths.
Sure.
We don't have to think about it, because I think psychologically we wouldn't be able to cope with what we're all going through if, while we were going through it, we were thinking about actually what is the horror of what is happening in our hospitals at the moment and to so many families. And so I was just very interested to be involved, just because I think now we're sort of hopefully slowly moving towards a slightly new normal. It's a bit more slightly like the old normal. Now's the time really very much for us to know what these doctors and nurses and cleaners and porters and in one case a patient, for us to know what they've been doing. And it's just, they're heartbreaking stories, but me and Serena, without discussing it, actually separately both came up with that actually what these stories are about is hope. And everybody we've interviewed at some point or other during their interview has hope.
Was it harder for you, like not being part of the NHS, to hear some of these stories? Because, I mean, it's all very well us making up dramas, but when it comes from a very real place, did it sort of take you by surprise? Two or three of them did. I mean, I was sort of shocked by how many of them, the interviewees, how many of them were coping so well. Yeah. They're all very, very strong people, but there are a couple of them where there's one guy in particular, and you just think, gosh, you're shell-shocked. You're actually shell-shocked by what you've been through. He's quite young. And that's something, again, I don't think we've been thinking about. I don't think we've been thinking about the actual effects on these people who deal with death regularly, but not to this scale, not to, a couple of them they talk about how they've gone from however many deaths they would face in a week to suddenly how many deaths they're facing in a day. And as Serena said earlier about dealing with families not being able to see them, these people being lonely, scared, terrified, and the fact that in many
but in all cases, these people we're interviewing often are the last people that a lot of people saw before they sadly died. They didn't get to speak to their families, and just the magnitude that has on people. So yeah, a couple of them did make me cry a lot, but even then, there's hope. And yeah, I kind of just, I think we've interviewed 17, 18 people, and I kind of really just want to buy them all a drink,
bless you,
because
mate.
I just think they are. The one thing none of them think is that they're heroes. None of them feel that they've been brave. But when you actually hear what they're going through and what they've done and how they're still going, it's just, it's quite awe-inspiring, really.
Let's talk about the actual sort of nuts and bolts of putting this together. I mean, presumably you had meetings on Zoom, etc. I mean, how did you decide who was going to adapt which story, for example?
I tried to distribute them so that the sort of emotional tone was spread evenly between us. I'm just trying to think of how I decided. There were some people I just thought Joe is going to completely nail this one. Joe is he knows he's one of my favourite writers because he makes it look so damn easy. He's very annoying because he's brilliant, and what he does is he nails emotional subtlety as well as story, which is a fantastic trick if you can pull that off in combination. So I gave him the scripts where I knew that he would bring out all of the tones and the contrasts. We both have slightly different skill sets. I do a lot of dark comedy drama, so there were some of the ones particularly where the dialogue was funny, mostly intentional, sometimes not. There's one of our interviewees who is absolutely passionate about her job, and she's an amazing senior intensivist, and I don't think she'd mind me saying, but her passion for her corgi almost matches it. And so Rufus, there's a big theme of dogs throughout the whole podcast, but her love and the care that she takes of her dog, and just the dialogue that she used, I rather selfishly snaffled that one, I'm afraid.
Oh, that's wonderful. So you said you've done a lot of other writing, but I mean, I'm reading here, senior consultant paediatrician. I mean, what do you do in your spare time, Serena?
I'm just sort of looking at the wounds on my hand from cooking. I've just been making a ratatouille for my boys. And no, I've got a greyhound, so I'm going to talk about dogs again. So I've got a greyhound that I walk. Greyhounds are remarkably lazy dogs. They have a burst of energy in the morning, then they sleep the whole day. So I'm a dog after my own heart. I don't know. I guess it's there's always that thing about if you want to get things done, ask a busy person, and I think that's the same for my colleagues as well. And I'm one of these people that likes seeing connections between things. So doing paediatrics connects me very much with the community. I'm also what's called the guardian of safe working hours, which was a job that arose after the junior doctors' strike a few years back, to make sure that junior doctors in training get the right conditions, training and pay. And that's what struck me throughout this whole thing as well, is how the junior doctors threw themselves into this crisis like you will not believe. Right from the time it was happening in Italy, people were cancelling all of their annual leave. And it's a massive problem now because there's a lot of doctors who need to take leave. But they were volunteering, people were coming in from everywhere. And I'm going to be honest and say they didn't look after themselves, a lot of them. And we do interview a junior doctor who is just the most open and honest guy. But I think he was quite wiped out by this.
Sure.
I need to I will check in with Toby if you're listening to this. I will check in on you again.
Hello, Toby. Talking
Toby,
about just talking about the names as well. I mean, obviously, presumably, were names changed to protect the innocents and all the rest of it, or is it actually these people?
These are these people. They are happy to have their names used after a little gentle persuasion. Again, not through feeling that they'd said anything controversial or it, just because they were actually quite humble. And again, it's that doing the difference between doing a documentary and doing a drama is that people can just talk at their own pace, at their own speed, and leave it to the writers to find the story thread throughout it. And it means, again, with a documentary, you have a second take, and then you lose the sort of emotional push of what people are saying. I think we always made sure the scripts always go back to the interview to make sure that they're happy, and they're happy in a few gentle edits. But Ben, our amazing security guy, who he talks about having more rabbit than Sainsbury's, very funny guy. He said, "Oh, this is me." He said, "This is me." He said, just with a bit more punctuation. And again, our chief medical officer, he spoke for 5.5 pages. And as I told him, and he said, and I said, "I'm afraid I did have to edit you a little." And again, he said, "This is a very strange, slightly surreal experience of seeing yourself." Now, and I'm going to be completely honest, he's in episode 6, which is the overview, because it's a sort of, as the time runs from the peak through to this time where we are slowing down a little bit and looking forward, hopefully, to things being much, much better, but also very mindful that there might be a second wave, perhaps in the autumn. My colleagues, Joe and Neil, decided it was a good idea to interview me as well. So I am one of the people. So
That's great.
It's rather meta.
And it's interesting what you say, and I think I'm in agreement with you. But Joe's very good you're very good, Joe, at tapping into that emotional side. What would you say would be your particular favourite episode, Joe, that you've worked on, without giving too many spoilers?
Ooh. It's difficult to talk about favourites, because they're real people.
Sure.
Serena interviewed a patient, for example, Mark, and he's lost 2 months of his life. I was driving back from somewhere, I don't know where, and I felt a bit out of breath. And I said to my wife, I went, "Sylv, I feel a bit out of breath." And so she drove me to the hospital, and then I woke up, and I haven't seen her in 2 months. And he hasn't, everything he remembers is what he was told by the nurses about how he was fighting them off, how he thought there was a conspiracy to kill him, because that's how terrifying it was, because they kept putting masks on him and things like that, and he was fighting them off. But again, he's just so funny, because he just talks about things like, they tell me all this stuff, and I don't believe a word of it, these nurses. They all lie. And he's brilliant, and he's so full of life, and that really...
But you know what I think? I just think it's the fact that you're not patronising anybody, because you're not making a drama where you think, oh, so-and-so would say that because they're that sort of person. There's no issue with that at all. This is all stripped back, real people, but just obviously packaged with actors.
Yeah, and what's actually interesting for me is, again, slightly dispassionately as a writer, taking myself out of that this is real. What was interesting for me was... So, for example, one of the guys is an ex-soldier, and he talks a lot about, he uses a lot of military terms, dialogue. So he says, I arrive at 0900 hours and da-da-da. He talks like that. But he also talks about his kids. And that my job was to sort of go, right, what's the story here? So what I did was moved all the kids' stuff to the end. So you got to know him as the work person, and then you got to know his real life person. But this guy who is this ex-soldier, who is... very precise about how he speaks and everything. When he starts talking about his kids and going to a park with them, he turns into a poet. I think when people listen to these, they might think me and Serena have occasionally enhanced what people are saying, because they might not believe that this guy who's this soldier would then suddenly start talking about the colours on trees and about butterflies and things. But they suddenly, all of them get to this poetic. And I think that's maybe part of the hopefully cathartic experience for them, is they're getting to sort of say things that they might not say to their families, and things they might not say to their friends. Going to say things that you'd say in the pub to your mates, that you wouldn't go, actually, that day the sun just felt so beautiful and blah, blah, blah. You wouldn't say that to a mate. And I think what Serena's done brilliantly is, and I wish people could hear the interviews, Serena makes a noise all the way through. She's always listening to them and encourages them to delve that bit deeper and to talk about poetic stuff and how they are actually feeling. And that's just gorgeous to sort of write, to then take those words and just maybe move them around a little bit. So yeah, no, I couldn't choose a favourite. Every single one of them is different, but every single one of them is full of hope, no matter what they've been through. Every single one of them has a great sense of humour. I think that must be a medical thing. I think to be a doctor or a nurse or a patient or whatever, you have to have a good sense of humour.
The team creating the podcast, all the actors and everything, are all donating their time free, apparently, to raise money for, I think it's St George's Hospital charity. Is that right, Serena?
That's right. The people are incredibly generous. This is the St George's charity and also the Actors Benevolent Fund, because when I first started thinking about this, there was half of my friends are medical and were going to work, and half of my friends are actors going, I don't know if I'm going to find enough money to eat. And it was a really, really scary time at the beginning. But the St George's charity have been supportive of this project, but the generosity of people to the NHS has been astounding. And people have been donating things like bath bombs from a famous, beautifully smelling bath bomb company. I don't know if I'm allowed
Other
to say.
bath bomb companies are available.
Yeah, no, exactly. The sort of one that when you come into Waterloo Station, you can't miss it. That one. And one company donated, I think it was 750 pairs of shoes. New shoes, and people are so pleased with their shoes. Just fundamentally lovely, generous gifts. And so asking people to donate will continue that thread going through for people who have given up so much, and that was a big theme again throughout the whole of the podcast, is just the sacrifices people made, and some of it didn't even make it onto it. One of our intensivists actually lived separately from his family for 2 weeks because he was scared about infecting the family. One of our nurses talks about not being able to hug her children. At the beginning, when we were just learning about it, there weren't the rest spaces for doctors. With the pictures that we got out of China of doctors and nurses sleeping on floors and shelves and all sorts. So I bought pillows just before everything had closed. I ran out to Primark, other shops are available, and Wilko, and bought duvet covers and throws and put chairs together to make tiny beds. Slightly, I took pictures and put it on my Facebook page. It's like what you're kind of hoping that you're going to get to rest on, actually what I managed to put together in 5 minutes. So it's just fundamental stuff like sleeping and eating and shoes, and that's what that makes a massive difference. So if people are able to donate, that would be huge, always hugely appreciated.
Absolutely.
And again, that's a huge thread in the podcast. People going, "There's so much chocolate, we love it."
And I mean, it just sounds like this whole project is basked in a vast sea of love, which is just so wonderful. But to give us a little detail about, just as we wrap up, how many episodes there are, when's it going to start, how do we hear it, where do we hear it?
Okay, so first episode, there's 6 episodes. First episode is on the 3rd of July. It will be on all the well-known podcast platforms. So there's 6 episodes, and each episode has 3 NHS workers featured, except the one episode that has Mark, our wonderful patient. And they all have themes. So they're all in time. So it starts off from the peak, running through to 2 weeks ago, but they're grouped together by the intensivists, the bereavement team, the nursing team, the support team, etc. So they've all got a theme, and each episode is half an hour, and it's all put together. So it's not a series of monologues; it's edited together to tell a story told by 3 people in each episode.
So Serena and Joe, listen, thank you so much. The very best of luck with this podcast. I am so looking forward to it. July the 3rd is when it starts. Everybody check it out.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And our thanks again go to Serena, Joe, the rest of their podcast team, and most importantly, to all the people whose story they've told. And Unmasked can be followed on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Now, before we go, it's time for the latest world news relating to the pandemic, dated Sunday the 14th of June, as we're recording. Boris Johnson has said people should be able to shop with confidence when non-essential stores reopen in England tomorrow. Shoppers will have to observe social distancing, whilst many businesses are fitting perspex screens and limiting the numbers allowed on their premises. The Prime Minister also said he wouldn't cut England's 2-metre social distancing rule unless the science said it was safe to do so. All shops in England selling what are called non-essential goods will be able to open. This includes retailers offering clothes, toys, books and electronics, as well as record shops, tailors, auction houses, photography studios and indoor markets. Iran has reported more than 100 coronavirus deaths in a single day for the first time in 2 months. Officials say that the rise is explained by an increase in testing. India is to convert another 500 railway carriages to create 8,000 more beds for coronavirus patients in Delhi amid a surge in infections. Home Minister Amit Shah announced a package of new emergency measures for the capital, including a rapid increase in testing for COVID-19. Nursing homes will also be requisitioned. A leaked Public Health England draft cited racism as a possible factor in why people of such backgrounds are at an increased risk of dying of the virus. The review, the second by PHE on the subject, pointed to discrimination as a root cause affecting health and the risk of both exposure to the virus and becoming seriously ill as a result of it. It's found that historic racism might mean that people were less likely to seek care or demand better personal protective equipment, whilst other potential factors included risks linked to occupation and inequalities in conditions such as diabetes. And finally, from yesterday, in England, single adults living alone or single parents with children under 18 can form an exclusive support bubble with one other household. The second household can be of any size, but nobody who is shielding should join the bubble. People in each bubble can visit each other's homes and go inside. They will not have to stay 2 metres apart and can stay overnight. It means, for example, that a single grandparent could pair up with one of their children's households. An adult living alone could mix with their parents, or 2 single friends living apart could get together. If anyone in the bubble develops coronavirus symptoms, everyone in both households must self-isolate. But if you don't live on your own, or with children under 18 only, then the rules haven't changed for you. And that's the latest news. Well, that's it for this edition. If you want to email us about anything at all, the address is coronachroniclesshow@gmail.com. Until next week, this is Nick Randall saying take care and look after yourselves. Goodbye. Crash.
Sorry, I'm a bit like Serena in that I'm a very sort of busy multitasking person and I'm making jam tarts. And I just burnt myself, so...
Oh, sweetheart!
No swearing.
Oh,